This article, written by Julia Yoff and posted on the Huffington Highline, presents the story of 6 mothers who lost their children to ISIS. These children grew up in non-Muslim families, were converted, radicalized, went to Syria, fought, and died. These are very personal accounts of each of their stories. They are laden with grief and talk about how the mothers each deal with this grief, finding solace in each other and through activism. And I think the crux or the thesis of this article, through the media, we are fed with narratives of the impacts of ISIS on the battlefield in Islamist states such as Syria. And this all feels very distant from us. But by giving a very raw portrayal of the impacts of ISIS on the back end where it recruits, which shockingly enough is closer to home than most would anticipate, the article screams for awareness about this phenomenon happening right below our noses. Personally, I believe Yoff does a good job of staying true to the integrity of nonfiction writing, allowing the issue to speak for themselves through the stories of these 6 mothers, their dialogues, and their actions. She brings forth thorough accounts of their stories with direct quotes from them, bringing us to the setting that they are in detail and gently opening up their world to us. Although I initially felt separate from the subject matter, as I read, I became increasingly emotionally invested in the issue. I felt as if it was engaging me by making me come to terms with different parts of my own identity that were brought under the spotlight. As a Muslim myself, I saw it as a personal affront that the values and philosophies I was brought up with were so drastically perverted. This idea that paradise lies at the feet of your mother, that is something I grew up with. And although I wanted so badly not to identify with these people, it just made me even more incensed that this was affecting such innocent people and lives. As a woman who would one day hopefully become a mother, I was struck by the last sentence of this article. From my understanding of the bonds that form between a mother and a child, I had no doubt that the mothers would have done everything in their power to protect their children from the harm they were causing themselves and others, and felt very helpless for them. And then finally, as a human being who knows love and who has recently lost a member of my family, the human suffering and grief emotionally moved me. So researching on the recruiting techniques of ISIS and how pervasive they are, I realized how sensitive ISIS has been to the emotional state of the Western world. They understand this as a very social emotional issue. And ISIS leverages on that to recruit young people, giving them a sense of community. So reflecting on this article, I see this as a reaction to that in the way it is so emotional. We need to leverage on that to reconnect human beings and reinvest in that sense of community. Yes, support is needed for these mothers to ease the process of grief, but even more important is the need for prevention, the education of youth everywhere so they can be more critical in situations such as these. Now, going one step further, I picked up from one of the author's interviews on the article that she had followed the stories of several Muslim mothers, and I wondered why their stories were not covered. Was it perhaps to appeal exclusively to the Western English reading audience of the Huffington Post? I would assume that the pain endured by each of the many more of the Muslim mothers who have lost their sons to ISIS is of no less gravitas to any of the stories featured in this article. And it would have been even more powerful, in my opinion, to highlight how important it is for everyone against ISIS, Western or not, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, to stand together. So to date, about 3,400 children have been recruited by ISIS from Western countries, and this is only on FBI count alone, about 100 or so from the US. And if one was presented with this figure and considers it against the 300 million total US population, from a utilitarian perspective, this seems minute. These people are outliers, and it's easier to blame the families or the mothers rather than invest in changing the situation. But when each story is carefully illuminated in all its fragility, it's a plea to action, because then the thought of any one more story becomes inconceivable, let alone hundreds or thousands more. And I think that is the power of creative nonfiction.